I'm Clifford II, and welcome to another episode of Impacting Lives That Impact the World. So welcome to the show. I have the pleasure of having with me today a very, very interesting individual. I think all of you are going to love this interview. I like to call him the comic book man. He's been around the comic book industry for a lot of years. Some people even call him their superhero because he's come into their environment and he has created this great atmosphere. He has been doing things in the community in the Bronx, New York for a long period of time, but not only has been doing stuff in the Bronx, he's been doing stuff in New York City. And not only in New York City, he's also been doing stuff nationally. And guess what, folks? This gentleman has just taken the show on the road and he's now international. And we have him here today and he's going to tell us his story, Mr. Alex Simmons. Alex, thanks for coming by.
Hey, Cliff, always glad to be around.
Alex, first, let's just tell the well, thank you very much.
I'm always going to say you look sharp.
Well, first, let's tell the audience exactly, how did you get yourself into the comic book industry? What sparked that desire to be a part of the comic book industry?
Everything that I've done with my career and my life has seemed to have jumped off of my childhood. And comics were a big part of it. You know, it was my fantasy realm. I read a lot of comics, I drew. I had an uncle who unfortunately passed away when he was 18, but my family was always telling me, oh, you know, your uncle, he used to draw, Uncle James used to do this, and now you're drawing. So, creating my own characters, drawing the characters I loved, that was always a part of my youth. Okay. And as I got older, I went into performing and still somehow writing remained a part of what I did. And eventually writing theater pieces and things translated also into writing articles, which eventually led to me writing some comic book stories because I knew some of the people in the industry at that time. So it was sort of exploring my creativity and my imagination and just taking it a step at a time, and eventually I wound up in this industry as a part of what I do with my life.
Now, did you actually go to school to learn how to become an illustrator and a writer, or is it just something?
No, in terms of the schooling per se, the farthest I got with that was I went to the High School of Art and Design. Okay. So, I was there for 10th, 11th, 12th grade, met some great people, had some great teachers, some of whom I still reach out to today, who, illustration was a part of it, and that was something that I was really into. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I got out. When I was there, I thought, yeah, I want to grow up and be a comic book artist. But by the time I got out, I had other interests too. I was sort of now really starting to look at the world and really starting to sort of explore, and I had all these things buzzing in my head. So yeah, I could draw to some degree, to some degree, but I wasn't focused on it. And then within a couple of years, I went into theater and I was performing. So my training at Art and Design led to my being able to do a lot of the promotional stuff for our theater, for the different theater groups and the flyers and things like that. But no, I didn't train to be a writer. I didn't train to be an illustrator beyond high school. And what happened was I just was always a storyteller. Okay. And that just sort of blossomed, and I made enough mistakes and survived that, yes, to eventually have a career in it.
Now, so you went into theater first, mm-hmm, and did you start off as an actor or a writer? In what part of the theater?
Totally as an actor. I still enjoy performing, although I don't do it much anymore. I did voiceover work. I did off Broadway, and so far off you can't even spell the word. I also did a lot of work backstage. Because I think really a part of learning your craft is learning how that world exists and how you can make things happen within it. So I was, stagehand, props, painting sets, all of that, lighting, and then eventually you do enough of it, there's stories you want to tell, so you start writing like monologues or scenes where a couple of characters are going together. And in the time period we're talking about for me, which was the late 60s, early 70s, actually more the early to mid 70s, the roles of African Americans or blacks, period, in theater and in film seemed to fall on one of two sides of the line. You're either doing the plantation stuff, and eventually either a side character, an unimportant character, or you're doing roots, mm-hmm, or you're the other side of the line where you're the angry black man. So I'm either, so it's like, and all of that world in between, we weren't getting there. So I started writing pieces for me to do in auditions that addressed other characters that I could play. And I also love to do accents, don't you know? So I would be doing things like that, and there was no roles for that. So I would write roles because there were blacks who were English and, lived in other countries. And so I was saying, give me a chance. So that led to my eventually writing a play. And the first major play that I wrote, the first full-blown play that I wrote, was a Sherlock Holmes play, which went on to win, some notoriety, and got published in an anthology with Amiri Baraka and Ed Bullen and people like that. So, lucky me.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, the play was called Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello, and every few years somebody does a little mini production of it somewhere in the world, and it just, it's just things happen like that for me.
That's great. So now take us from that atmosphere to your first job in the comic book industry. How did that happen?
Wow. Okay. Had friends in the comic book industry who were writers and editors and so forth, and I was just hanger-oner outside, just sort of enjoying that contact. And what happened was, again, as I said, I'm a storyteller, so you're around these people, you're watching them do all this, and eventually an idea comes to you, and you think, let me try this. So I actually came up with a character called Blackjack, which is an African-American soldier of fortune in the 1930s. Right. I love those old movies, but 99% of the times you didn't see us, or we're carrying luggage or somebody's lunch. So I knew that there were blacks who were out exploring the world and so forth. So I wrote these stories. I was mentored by Dick Giordano, who at that time was a VP at DC Comics, and I knew him from, again, hanging out with people. I was mentored by a few other people that I knew, and that was my first effort to try and get someone to take something that I did and publish it in the comic book industry. Didn't work out. Didn't work out. So that went up on the shelf. But what did happen was enough people had heard about it, there was a lot of buzzing about it, and eventually people said, I'd buy that book, but you're not going to get the majors to do a book with a black lead in a period piece scenario. It's just not going to happen. So you need to think about another avenue. And eventually I said, well, if enough people think this much of the property, maybe I should be doing it independently. Now, going back to my theater experience, you produce a show with a couple of friends and $1.90. So it was the same thing, the attitude with publishing. So that's what happened. I got together people that I knew. I found an artist for it who's actually a Brazilian artist. So here I am communicating with him through his agent in Sao Paulo, and put together the first book and published it, and bam, suddenly, everyone's originally they said it was only going to be for like urban niches, and people in Bed-Stuy will read this, and people in Watts will read this. It's not going to hit a major audience base. And we started getting emails. First, all the reviews were fantastic. Then we started getting emails from like Copenhagen. And I was like, we're the brothers hanging out in Copenhagen. This is what I understand. So it just sort of blew up from that. And from that independent project of mine, the industry then went, right, just a little tap here and there. And DC brought me in to create a new black superhero for the Batman universe, which I called Orpheus. And we got to do a 5-part miniseries with him. And then they used him in a couple other storylines before DC decided to cut his throat, literally. And I remember you did that, DC. But then by that point too, I was also already talking to other people, and I did some other things for DC. I did a Superman story. I did a lot of Scooby-Doo stuff, which was fun. And frankly, Scooby-Doo is a global ambassador. Anywhere I mention that name, Scooby, they go crazy. So just keep that in mind. When the world's really on the brink, bring in Scooby. We can settle everything.